Hi Design Cutters, my name's Joanna Fallon and I'm here to bring you a brand new tutorial from designcuts.com. Now you may have noticed that the voice is a little different from previous tutorials. That's because Eric is no longer able to do these due to other commitments, and we'd like to take this opportunity to wish him all the best for the future and to thank him for the fantastic work he's done on previous tutorials. In this tutorial we'll be creating a colourful illustrated style travel postcard, mainly in Photoshop, but also using Illustrator to create some custom shapes. To help us do this, we'll be using a generous number of freebies from the Versatile Textures and Patterns collection. This is a huge collection of patterns and textures from world-class designers that will breathe life into your designs and save you a lot of time by not having to create your own for every project. Along with these freebies, we'll be using Montserrat, a free font you can download to create our holiday postcard. So we're going to start by opening a new document in Photoshop, and first let's title this Marrakesh Travel Postcard Design. And we're going to make sure that the dimensions for this are 105mm in width and 148mm in height, which is the standard A6 size, which is what most postcards are. We're going to leave the resolution at 300 pixels per inch and the colour mode to RGB because we're going to be viewing this mainly on the screen. And let's create our document. We've got our blank canvas here, and you can see I've got the rulers already set up on my workspace, but if you don't see those, go to View and select the rulers option here, making sure that it's got the tick on the left hand side. We're going to add some guides to help us with the layout of our design, which you can do from this menu. And we're going to go to New Guide, and we're going to make sure that the vertical orientation is checked and type in 5%. And I've just hit return on the keyboard to apply that. So you can see we've got a new guide here on the left hand side, and we just need to repeat the process 4 more times to get everything up and running. So we're going to add one at 95%. Then we're going to go to the horizontal orientation and add one at 4%. %, and 96%. And you can see our rough guidelines set up here, where we've got this we've got a border all around the whole canvas, and we've got 2 main areas, one here for the illustration and one here for our text. We're going to leave these guides visible throughout the design process because they're going to help us along, but if at any point you want to turn them off just to see how things are looking without them, you can click Option, semicolon, that'll turn them off, and if you press that again, it'll bring them back. We're going to use the first of our freebie files to add a paper texture to the whole design, and we're going to apply this first as it's going to apply to everything, and it just means that as we're working we're going to see how the final effect will look rather than suddenly getting a surprise at the end when the colours all look a bit different. We're going to be adding this texture by using a pattern fill. So if we go to File, Open, and if you navigate to a playful seamless texture pack, Coconut 12x12 JPEG tile, and that's by Lisa Glanz, and open that. If we go to Edit in the main menu, click Define Pattern, we can leave the name as it is, click OK, then close this window here because that's all done. Go to Layer, Add New Fill Layer, and click Pattern, and we're going to name this Paper Texture. Make sure that Use Previous Layers to Create Clipping Mask is unchecked. Leave everything else as default and click OK. You can see that our texture has been applied to the background, and because that was the last pattern that we saved, it's the first one that's come up from the options. If you don't see it, just click on the drop down here and you should be able to find it. Make sure the link with layer is selected, and we're going to reduce the scale of this slightly to about I'm going to say maybe 80%. There we go. So that just makes the texture a little bit tighter. And we're going to change the blend mode of that to multiply. Next, we're going to add a screen texture to the illustrated part of our design, or what will be the illustrated part of our design. And for that, we're going to go back to our freebies. This time though, we're going to go to File and Place Embedded. And if you navigate to where Blue Line Design Tin Type Textures is, just to note that your file structure might be a little bit different from mine, select that and click Place. You can see that the transform tool's already applied to the image. And what we're going to do is just freely transform this so that the main image overlaps our guidelines. There we go, I'm fairly happy with that. Then we can click the tick button here to apply the changes. Now at the moment, if we apply a screen texture, all this white area here is going to basically blank out the design, and the black areas here will still be visible. And we want to switch that round. If you hit Command I on the keyboard, Control if you're on Windows, you'll see that the colours have reversed. Now we want to increase the contrast of this a little bit, so we're going to go to our Adjustment Layers icon here and select Brightness Contrast. Now first thing we're going to do is click this little clipping box here, which will mean that this effect only applies to the layer directly below it. Firstly, we're going to move the brightness up to about pretty high, up to about 1, 2, 3, and the contrast all the way up to 100, so you can see that the white areas are really bright there. And we're going to be using this effect a lot, so if you see this little kind of downwards arrow to the left hand side of any layer, that means whatever's going on in this layer only applies to the one directly below it. What we're going to do now is reduce the opacity to about 25% and change the blend mode to screen. This has made things look completely invisible for now, but once we start creating the design below, you'll be able to see what effect the layer is having. Finally, to get into some good housekeeping habits, we're going to group these layers together. And sorry, I've done that by selecting that one, holding down the Shift key and selecting the next one. Then press Command G to group them, or you can use the little icon of the folder at the bottom. I'm going to rename this Screen Texture. And what we'll do is we'll just drag that folder below the paper texture, because that's the one that we want to keep at the top the whole time. Next, we're going to be adding the text, and we're going to be using the free Google font Montserrat, which I really hope I'm pronouncing correctly. So you can find the link to that in the written tutorial. And what we're going to do is to download, select this font. You see at the bottom here, one family selected, and from here you can download the font to your computer. If you need a little extra guidance on how to use Google Fonts or how to install fonts, you'll find a couple of extra resources in the written tutorial. Once you've downloaded your fonts, we're going to just click on the background layer here so that all subsequent layers go above that and below the screen texture. So we're going to click on our type tool and we'll go somewhere roughly in the middle of the lower section. And from our type options bar that's opened up here, we're going to find Montserrat font, and it's at the top there because I've used it recently. We're going to go for bold for the weight, 32 for the size, and for the colour we're going to enter the hex value 4D1413, and we'll click OK. And we're going to type in all caps Marrakesh and click the tick icon up here to apply that text. So if we line it roughly into the middle, see there, you can see that this could do with being a little bit wider. So if we go back to the type tool and highlight that line, we're going to go over to our character panel here. And what we're going to do is increase the tracking, which is the space between individual characters, to 150. And that kind of sort of spaces the word out a little bit more and makes it fit in the allocated space better. So you can see our little pink center lines appeared there, so we know that's central. And somewhere in the middle, use the type tool to click on another line. And this time we're going to go back up to our type options here, select light, and bring the font size down to 11 points. And then we're going to type in regular case, little hyphen, greetings from the capital of Morocco, space and hyphen. You can see here that the 150 tracking is still applied, so this makes this line a little bit too wide for the space. So we're going to go back and reduce this to 50, which is the default, and you can see it just sits much better in there. I'm going to zoom in, hide that character panel, make sure the move tool is selected, and just use the arrow keys on the keyboard to line that up with the base of the border here, or sorry, the base of the guides I should say. And we're going to select the Marrakesh line and move that down a little bit as well, so we've got a little bit of space between this guideline here and the top of the greetings line. Just to make sure that's central, what we're going to do is select all these layers. So I'm going to select the background layer, hold down the shift key and select the greetings line, and that selects everything sort of in between. Then going to make sure the move tool selected and click on the align horizontal centers, and that'll mean everything's matched up to this locked background layer. Continue the housekeeping. We're going to select these layers, hit Command G to group, and rename this folder text. Next, we're going to start working on the illustrated part of our design, and we're going to use another freebie for that. So let's go to File, Place Embedded. We're going to navigate to our artsy blue watercolor background from Little Valley Studio. Going to click this tick icon here to place the file, then go to Edit, Transform, and rotate 90 degrees clockwise. I'm going to hit Command T on the keyboard to bring back the free transform tool, and I'm just going to move this so it fits just outside the guidelines and that it's a little bit longer than a square. So I'm going to say about there. And I've just hit return on the keyboard to apply that transformation. With the layer still selected, I'm going to hit Alt Command J on the keyboard, click OK, and make sure the clipping mask option's unchecked, and then set the layer blend mode to multiply. With that layer still selected, I'm going to duplicate it by clicking Alt Command J on the keyboard, hit OK, and then change the blend mode to multiply on our duplicated layer. We're then going to go to our adjustment layers and create a new Hue Saturation layer. First thing we're going to do is check the clipping option, so it only applies to the layer below. Then we're going to make sure that the colorize option is checked, and we're going to change the hue to 210. We're going to change saturation to 100 and the lightness to -30. And if you're wondering, I was just using the tab key on the keyboard to go between those options. We're going to apply a gradient mask to this layer to create a fading effect. And we're going to click on the mask thumbnail here, make sure it's selected with this little box around it. Check that black is set to the foreground color here, and then go to our gradient tool. And if you click and hold, you can select the option there. And whilst holding down the shift key, this will mean that we draw a perfectly straight line. Click probably about a quarter of the way up from the bottom, drag a line up to about 3/4 of the way up and let go, and you can see we now have this faded effect. We're going to go back over to our layers panel here, hold down shift and select the 3 layers that we just created, Command G, and we're going to rename this group Sky. I'll quickly mention now that we've got some backdrop going on that you can see the screen texture a little bit here in the left. So if I just make that invisible. You can see how it's affecting the design and how it's useful to have that from the very start. And next, we're going to create a moon to add to our sky, and we're going to be doing that in Illustrator. So let's go over there, and it doesn't matter too much what size the document is. I'm going to go for an A4 landscape. And the first thing we want to do is make sure the fill there is selected to black and the outline is set to transparent. I'm going to go and select our ellipse tool, and whilst holding down Alt and Shift, click and drag, and that will enable us to draw a circle from the center. And that's quite close to the edge, so I'm just going to move it over here a bit. With that shape selected, we're going to hit Command C on the keyboard and then Command F, and that will have pasted an exact copy directly above the original shape. You can also do that via the edit menu and copy and paste in front. I'm going to click and hold this top shape and hold down the Shift key and then move it across a bit until I can see a crescent shape appearing in the outline here, and then let go. And I'm just going to move these back into the middle a little bit. I'm going to select both these circles, and then I'm going to go to the Pathfinder window, which if you haven't already got it open, you can access it via Windows and Pathfinder. And then I'm going to click on this little icon to the far right, which is minus back, and that's going to cut out the shape at the back from the one at the front. And there you can see we've got a nice crescent moon shape. I'm going to select that and change the colour to white. You might want to move this just outside the artboard so you can see it. And then we're going to hit Command C to copy, go back to Photoshop and click Command V. And we're going to select Paste a Smart Object and make sure Add to My Current Library is unchecked. You can see that the transform bounding box is already applied. So what we're going to do is hold on the Shift key and scale that down slightly, and then move it up to this upper right corner and just put it on a little bit of an angle. And just have a little play around with that until you find a position that you're happy with. And then I'm going to hit return to apply that, and then rename the layer Moon. Actually, what I might do is just make that a little bit smaller. There we go. And we're going to give this layer a home in the Sky folder. So if we just click and drag over the Sky folder there, you can see it's gone into there. Now that we've got our backdrop set up, we're going to start working on the foreground elements, which is the temple. With the Sky group selected, we're going to hit Create a New Layer. And that means that the layer will go above the one that was selected. And we're going to rename this Pink Colour Block. We're going to go change our foreground colour, and we're going to enter the hex value E8637A, which is this nice kind of warm soft pink, and click OK. Then we're going to go over to our rectangular marquee tool, and we're going to draw a small rectangle towards the left hand side. So we're going to try and match this up as closely as possible to the baseline of our sky, but it doesn't matter too much if it's not perfect. It's not going to be visible by the end of the design, and let go there. And what we've got is the outside edge is just over the guidelines here. When you're happy with that, click Alt Delete on the keyboard, and that will fill it with our foreground colour. And I'm just going to click anywhere on the canvas to get rid of our marching ants. We're going to be using another freebie now, so go to File, Place Embedded. We're going to be using Eskimo Family's Fairy Tiles. And once you've found that, click Place. We're going to change the blend mode of that to Multiply. And then as the Free Transform tool bounding box already applied, we're going to hold down Shift and drag it down from the corner here, so it's a little bit closer to the size of our box. And let's just zoom in a little. And we want that to more or less match the width of our rectangle. So let's move that along, and don't worry too much about what's going on outside the guidelines. We're going to be basically making everything outside of there disappear by the end of the design. And I'm happy with that, so I'm going to click return. We've got a bit of the design poking over the pink box here, which we do want to get rid of though. So we're going to do that by using a layer mask. So with the layer selected, we're going to go down to our layer mask icon here, and you'll see that the mask thumbnails appeared, and just make sure that it's selected when it's got this little white box around it. From there, we're going to use our rectangular marquee tool again, and just draw a rectangle so that it matches up with the edge of this pink box. Make sure that the foreground colour is set to black and click Alt Delete. We're now going to add a few details, and we're going to be using more freebie files for that. So we're going to go back to File, Place Embedded, go to Studio M18 and find the hand-drawn pattern border number 4-01 and click Place. Now you can see that's huge, so holding down the Shift key, we're going to scale this down so that it matches up. I'm just going to zoom in by pressing Command and the plus key, holding down Shift and just getting it to the more or less the same width as these pink boxes. We're going to move it so that it sits on top of the box and this wavy line covers the edge. When you're happy with that, click Return, and we're going to add a new Hue Saturation adjustment layer to change the colour. So we're going to go down to our adjustment layer icon, Hue Saturation, make sure the clipping option is checked, and enter also make sure Colorize is selected first, otherwise our values won't work. Click 221, 74, and plus 40. We're going to add some more decorative elements with some more freebies. So we're going to go back to our file, Place Embedded, and navigate to Samolevsky Art, 100 hand-drawn seamless patterns and shapes, number 41, which is this lovely kind of golden circle here, and click Place. And as the free transform bounding box is already applied, we're going to go towards this corner until the rotate icon appears. Hold down Shift on the keyboard and drag it down, and that kind of locks it to 5-degree intervals. And I'm going to bring this all the way over to 90 degrees, and that's just another way of moving it there. Let go. And I'm going to zoom in again, pressing Command or Option plus. And it's still a bit big. So just play around a little bit with the size and positioning as well. And I think it looks like a fairly good position. Let's just zoom out a bit to get a better idea. I'm happy with that. So what we want is half this circle to be visible on the wall and half to be kind of poking out underneath. I'm just going to nudge that down slightly and hit return to commit the transformation. I'm going to say as well, we're going to be able to move all these shapes at any point throughout the design, so don't worry too much about getting things exactly how they look on the screen. All of these can be edited and adjusted as we go along. Now I've just noticed that this layer has crept its way to the top, so we're just going to move that back down to underneath the screen texture and the paper texture. We're going to be creating another layer mask to hide this overlap. So with the layer selected, click on our Create a Layer Mask icon, check that it's selected here on the thumbnail, the foreground colour is set to black, and we're going to be using our rectangular marquee tool just to line it up with the base of that pink box there. Click Alt Delete on the keyboard and just click off. With the layer that we just worked on selected, hold down the Shift key and click this pink colour block layer, and that'll select everything in between. Hit Command G on the keyboard, and I'm going to group those together and name the folder Pink Wall Left. The general rule with folder names is the more self-explanatory, the better. We're going to select our pink wall folder left, and then we're going to duplicate the group by clicking Alt Command J, and that would have gone above the original. And you can see there it's got the word copy after it, but we're going to rename that to pink wall. Right. With the move tool selected, we're going to go over to the shape on our canvas, hold down the shift key and click and drag that across in a straight line to the other side. We want this to be a mirrored effect rather than just a direct copy. So again, with the group selected, we're going to go to Edit in the main menu, Transform, and then Flip Horizontal. And you can see that's flipped it round and we've got a mirror image of our wall. Then if we're going to be really tidy, we'll select both these groups, Command G, and we're going to just have one big pink wall folder for the both of them. We're now going to add a bit of greenery to our design, and we're going to be doing that using some more freebies. Firstly though, make sure that the sky layer or the sky folder is selected, because we want these to appear behind or below the pink wall layer. Then I'm going to go to File, Place Embedded, and from Samolevsky Art again, we're going to be using shape number 8, which is kind of a very cool abstract leaf, and click Place. We're going to go to one of the corners here, hold down Shift and just scale that down quite a bit. And also it's going to rotate it so that it's a bit more perpendicular to the wall. Maybe move that across somewhere along there. That does look quite small, so it's going to make it a bit bigger. Have a little play around, and once you're happy, I'm going to say about there, what we're aiming to do is get about 7 leaves total across. And I've just hit return to apply that transformation. And then we're going to hit Alt on the keyboard until you see this double cursor appear. And then, still whilst holding down the Alt key, hold down Shift, and then click and drag. And then repeat the process until you get about 7 leaves in total. Don't worry too much about the placing for now. The ones that do matter are the 2 leaves, on either side. So actually I think I'd quite like those to be a little bit lower, so I'm going to click the top leaf there and then hold down Shift and the bottom leaf layer. That'll select everything, and then with the move tool selected, I'm just going to use the arrow key to nudge it down slightly, or up as well. There we go, I'm quite happy with that. So with all these still selected, what we're going to do is evenly space them all between each other. So the first and last leaves or objects are going to be the markers, and we're going to go over here in the Properties panel and distribute the horizontal centers. And that means that all the leaves are now evenly placed, and this central leaf is going to be hidden anyway, so let's just find him in the middle and delete the layer. We're then going to select the remaining layers, hit Command G to group them, and you can probably guess we're going to name this layer Trees. Next up, we're going to start creating the centerpiece of our design, which is going to be the blue temple. We're going to make sure that our pink wall group is selected because we want all subsequent layers to go above this. We're going to go to File, Place Embedded, and we're going to navigate to our freebies folder and go to Katya Jadzinka and select 16 geometric patterns A4 14. I'm going to click Place, and with the bounding box for the free transform tool still selected, we're going to click Alt and Shift on the keyboard, and this means that everything will scale in proportion and from the center. Go to one of the corners and click and drag. So it's probably, I'm going to say about that kind of width there. Then while still holding down the Shift key to keep it central, let's drag it down so it more or less matches our baseline. And I'm happy with that, so I'm going to click Return on the keyboard. We're going to do the same again with a different file. So I'm going to go to File, Place Embedded, and this time the other geometric pattern from the same folder. Click place, and again hold down Alt Shift and scale from the corner so that it's a little narrower than the original rectangle. Hold down Shift so that it kind of pokes up about a third of the way up, I'm going to say. Click tick, and we're just going to move that, so click and drag so it sits behind our main temple wall here. And seeing it in place there, I'm just going to click Shift and click and drag that up slightly so you can see just a little bit more of it there. For our next step, we're going to create a custom shape for our door frame, and we're going to be doing that back over in Illustrator. With our rectangle tool selected, we're going to just click once on the canvas and input a width of 40mm and 60mm for the height, and click return or OK, and let's just change the colour back to black so we can see it better. With the rectangle tool still selected, we're going to click L on the keyboard, and that will change it to the ellipse tool, and then I'm going to click once on the canvas again and type in 40mm by 40mm, and that gives us a perfect circle. Using our selection tool, we're just going to move that so that it more or less matches up with the edges of the rectangle. Just to make sure those are perfectly central, we're going to select both those objects and go to our Align panel if it's not already there. If you can find it in Window, Align. And we're going to make sure that the Align to Selection option is selected, and then horizontally align center. What we want to do now is make this just one shape. So select both the shapes again, go to our Pathfinder panel, which should still be open from earlier, and click on the Merge button. And you can see there now, that's all joined together just to make one shape. With it selected, we're going to hit Command C on the keyboard, go back to Photoshop. We're going to select our uppermost layer here below the screen texture to make sure that it's pasted above that. Hit Command V on the keyboard, make sure Smart Object selected, click OK, and then as before hold down the Alt and Shift keys and scale that from the corner so it's about half the width, I'd say, of that main temple area. Hold down Shift and drag down so that it matches the baseline. And once you're happy with that, I'm going to hit return. What we're going to do is go back to our kind of the white pattern layer, click Alt Command J to duplicate the layer, click OK, and then drag that above our Vector Smart object, which has just reminded me we're going to rename Doorframe. Hold down Shift and just click and drag this layer so that it sits above the door frame, covering it. And we're going to clip this to the layer below. And we're going to do this by either right-clicking on the layer and selecting Create Clipping Mask, or another way is to hover between the two layers, click Alt on the keyboard, and you'll see this little downwards arrow can appear. Click, and that will apply a clipping mask. Next, we're going to go back and click on the original version of that layer, so this block here, because we want the next layer to go just above that but below everything else. Go to File, Place Embedded, navigate back to our freebies, and this one is from Studio M18, and we're looking for this nice hand-drawn pattern. I'm going to click Place, and as before, hold down Alt and Shift, click and drag from one of the corners, and what we want to do is hold down Shift and drag that upwards so it stays central. We kind of want it to sit just slightly inside that upper portion of the temple there, and that looks about right to me. I might just nudge it up slightly. Okay, next we're going to group all these layers together. And I'm going to call this Temple Blue. And The reason for that will become evident very shortly. With this group selected, we're going to go to our Hue Saturation Adjustment layer, click this clipping icon, hit Colorize, and we're going to change the hue to 225, saturation all the way up to 100, and the lightness to plus 51. And you can see that's applied this blue colour to all the items within that group. Now this is almost a little bit too blue for the design, so we're going to tone this down and add a bit of texture by using another of our freebie textures. So we go to File, Place Embedded, and from your freebies, navigate to Lisa Gland's Seamless Paper Slate image. We're going to place that. And the first thing we're going to do is just change the blend mode to multiply, so we can see the image below, and this is how the effect is going to be anyway, so it gives us a better idea of what things are going to look like. Alt Shift and drag from the corners, and we're going to be using a clipping mask, so it doesn't matter too much about the size, as long as it covers this lower portion here. And happy with that, I'm going to click Return, and I'm going to just drop the opacity to 75% for that layer as well. I'm going to go to our layer mask icon here, check that the mask thumbnail is highlighted, the foreground colour is set to black, and then we're going to go to our rectangular marquee tool, maybe just zoom in slightly so we can see better, and carefully trace around the edge of that rectangle there. And what we want is to see the effects within this square. So if we hold down Shift, Command or Option and I on the keyboard, you can see there that that has reversed the selection so that everything outside of the rectangle we drew is selected. Click Alt Delete to fill the colour, and that has applied our layer mask. And I've just noticed that it's gone to the top of our layer stack, so we're going to just drag that back down so it sits between the screen texture and our temple folder. I'm then going to select that and select the Hue Saturation and our temple folder, group that as well, and I'm going to name this Temple Layer 1. So Temple Layer 2 follows Temple Layer 1, and that's going to be all the parts of our temple design that aren't affected by this saturation and texture, so we want those to sit on top of these. Going back into our pink wall folder and our pink wall right, we're going to duplicate our ridge pattern, that one there, by selecting Layer and Alt Command J on the keyboard, click OK, and we're just going to drag and move this into, or in between, the screen texture folder and the temple layer 1 folder. Now by moving that, the original Hue Saturation clipping mask has disappeared, so we need to reapply that. So we select the Hue Saturation, hover between the two layers, click Alt on the keyboard and click. We'll just go back to hiding that. And you can see that our shape is duplicated here without the hue saturation applied. And we're going to move that to above our blue temple. Hit Command T to activate the free transform bounding box and hold Shift so we can just scale that down so it fits the width, and just nudge it downwards so we don't get the sort of harsh edge there at the top. Actually, it's like it's overlapping a little bit still, so let's just reduce that ever so slightly. There we go. We're then going to apply a Hue Saturation adjustment layer there, so I'm going to click on our icon, Hue Saturation, make sure our clipping option is selected, make sure Colorize is selected, and then enter Hue 0, Saturation 42, and lightness 42, and that gives us this kind of nice terracotta maroon kind of shade. We're going to just group the saturation layer and the object layer together and rename that ridge lower. With that layer selected, we're going to click Alt Command J to duplicate it and just rename that ridge upper. Then with the move tool, we're going to hold down the shift key, drag that up, and then pressing Command T to select the free transform tool, hold down Alt and Shift on the keyboard. Not sure what happened there. And hold down Alt Shift, and we're going to rescale this so again it just matches the width of this upper block. Zoom in a little more just to check that. And hit return. Just to neaten that up and reduce the number of layers over here, we're going to group those two layers and just call it ridges. We're going to add a couple more elements, so we're going to go back to File, Place Embedded, and from our freebies look for Studio M18 and this seamless pattern border here. Holding down Alt and Shift, I'm going to click and drag that so that again it matches the width, and let me just zoom in slightly to get it more accurate. And what we're going to do then is let go of all the keys on the keyboard and just stretch that vertically a fair bit. So I'm going to say about that there. Click return, just nudge it upwards a little bit. And then if we press Command I on the keyboard, that's going to reverse the colour so the black becomes white. Then I'm going to click Alt on the keyboard, a double cursor will appear, hold down Shift as well, and then I'm going to just drag a copy of that above there. And if we zoom out, you can see how that all looks together. Then I'm going to select and group those two layers and name it lines. Next up, we're going to create a door for our door frame, and we're going to do that back over in Illustrator. So you can see that was our shape that we created previously. Just move that out of the way slightly. And from our toolbar, we're going to select our rounded rectangle tool. Click on the canvas. I'm going to add the width at 25 millimeters. Height remains at 60 millimeters. And the corner radius is 7 millimeters. Just zoom in a little there. Next, we're going to go to our rectangle tool and just drag a rectangle shape so that it goes over the sort of edges of the radius here. Then on the keyboard, I'm going to press Shift, Command, and left square bracket, and that will have sent the object to the back. You can also do that via Object, Arrange, Send Backward, or Send to Back. And then we're going to select both our shapes and going back to our Pathfinder panel, which should be open from earlier. Click the minus back, and that gives us some nice sharp corners for the base of our door. Then we're going to go to our ellipse tool and draw a freehand ellipse about the same width as our door. Using our selection tool, we're going to hold down the Shift key and move that upwards so there's a bit of an overlap here between the ellipse and the top of the door. So what we want is this kind of little dink just between the two curves. We're going to go to our direct selection tool, click on the uppermost point and drag that up, and if we hold down Shift, that's going to lock it centrally. And just bring that slightly so it becomes more of a dome shape. I'm going to select both those shapes, and as before, we're going to go back to our Pathfinder panel, which should be open from earlier, and merge those two shapes together. Select the object, hit Command C on the keyboard, go back to Photoshop and click Command V, paste a smart object, and then hold down the Alt and Shift keys on the keyboard to scale that down so it's a little narrower than the width of our door frame. Hold down Shift just to drag that towards the bottom there. I'm also happy with that. Click Return. I'm going to rename this layer Door. And we want to give the door a nice wooden texture, which we're able to do using one of our freebies. So we go to File, Place Embedded, and navigate to our Diverse Wood Texture by Counterpart Creative and click Place. With the Free Transform bounding box selected, we're going to hover over a corner here to rotate it, hold down Shift, and that will allow us to fairly easily lock it to about 90 degrees. Hold Alt Shift on the keyboard and scale it down from one of the corners. We want it really so that it just covers the door, and Shift and drag down. So that looks about right. You can't see any of the door under there. So I'm going to hit Return to apply the transformation. And what we want to do is click that to the door shape directly below. So hover between the two layers, hit Alt on the keyboard and click. And what we can do there is just move that layer around a little bit so we can get it to an area of the pattern or texture that we like. I'm quite liking that sort of crack towards the top there. And have a little play, just see what it looks like in different areas. And when you're happy with the position of the textures, we're going to select the door and the group's lines and ridges. Group those together and name it Temple Layer 2. Next, we're going to be creating the dome roof of our temple, and we're going to be using a pattern layer for that, like we did at the very start of this tutorial. So we're going to find our pattern file from our freebie. So go to File, Open, and from Samuelewski Art, we're going to go for this lovely bright yellow pattern here. So that opens in a new window. And what we want to do first is, using our eyedropper tool here in the toolbar, just click on any yellow part of the background and make sure that's appeared in our recent swatches, because we'll be using that later. As before, we're going to go to Edit, Define Pattern, just leave it as the default name, click OK, and then we can close that window because we're all done. Then with the Temple Layer 2 group selected, create a new layer using our little new layer icon. Rename it Dome, and then select the elliptical marquee tool. Position your cursor kind of roughly in the middle of the top of the temple here. Hold Alt Command Shift on the keyboard and drag out a circle from the center. And then you'll see our little marching ants forming a circle there. Then, with it still selected, we're going to go to Layer, New Fill Layer, Pattern. We're just going to leave this name Pattern Fill 1. And you can see that our pattern has been applied, but it's quite big at the moment. So we'll go to Scale and bring that down to maybe something like 23% maybe, 20. Just have a little play with the scale there to see what you think. Quite like it at 19. So I'm going to leave it about 23. Press Return or hit OK to apply that. And next up, we're going to draw some little circle details above our temple. So let's create a new layer above that with our elliptical marquee tool selected, and make sure that the yellow that we just took a swatch of is selected as the foreground colour. And then roughly in the middle, hit Alt and Shift on the keyboard and click and drag out a smallish circle. Click Alt Delete, and we're just going to get the Move tool and move that down and just nudge it a bit. We're going to centre everything up perfectly in a minute anyway, so don't worry too much. This is just to get an idea of where things are. And we'll rename that layer Circle Big. Then, whilst holding down Alt on the keyboard until this double cursor appears, click on the circle, hold down Shift and drag a duplicate upwards. Command T on the keyboard, hold down Alt and Shift and just scale that from the centre. Click the tick there or press return to apply the changes. Hold down Shift and we're going to drag that down a little bit. Then we're going to select all the layers that we just created there for the roof. And also, whilst holding down the Command key on the keyboard, click this locked background layer and with the Move tool selected, go to the options bar at the top and align to horizontal centres. And that just shifts everything across to centre with the background. We'll just rename this layer Circle Little and then create a new layer above that, which we're going to rename Spike. Going to zoom in a little bit. Don't worry too much about it being perfectly centre or straight. We do want to keep this looking fairly hand-drawn. So I'm going to just click and draw a freehand straightish line to form a little spike at the top of our temple. Let's zoom out so we can see. And I'm pretty happy with that. We're then going to select all these roof layers that we just created. Hit Command G to group them together. And we're going to name them Roof. You can see that our design is really taking shape now and we're almost done. But having a little look, it does seem like there's way too much space between the top of this temple and kind of the top part of our design. So I'm going to just move things up a little bit, and having these layers really nicely grouped has made this going to make this process a lot easier. So we're just going to select all the areas that we want to move. Make sure the Move tool is selected, hold down Shift, and just push that up a little bit. And I'm much happier with that. That does mean that we've got a little bit of sky poking out the bottom. So go back to our sky group, which is very easily findable. And what I'm just going to do is select these two layers, hit Command T for the transform tool, and just manually rescale that. Okay, I'm pretty happy with those changes. Let's just close that folder. We now need some ground for the temple to stand on, so it doesn't look quite like it's floating in midair. And we're going to make sure our temple layer 2 group is selected so that all layers go above that. And we're going to go and grab another freebie. So go to File, Place Embedded. And it's one we used before, but it's just easier to replace it from the start. And it's our slate texture that we want. Click Return to place that. And we're going to reduce the opacity ever so slightly just so we can see the design below it. And we're going to move that back up to 100 in a moment. Hold down Shift and just drag that down so it pokes out the bottom of the guideline there. Apply those changes. And we're going to create a layer mask just so it's visible in this bottom portion. So with the layer selected, click on our Create Layer Masked icon. Make sure the thumbnail is highlighted. Foreground colour is set to black. And we're going to select our rectangular marquee tool and just zoom in a little bit so that we get a slightly more accurate selection. And we want that area there to be visible. Now we want this to be visible and mask out everything on the outside. So with the marching ants still visible, click Shift Command I on the keyboard and you'll see that selected everything outside that rectangle. Hit Alt Delete and then bring the opacity back up to 100 and just click anywhere to get rid of those marching ants. Go back to File, Place Embedded, and to our freebies we're going to go back to our Studio M18 pattern here. And with the bounding box still selected for the free transform tool, we're going to rotate that whilst holding down Shift so we can get it fairly easily to 90 degrees. And hold down Alt Shift get it so that the width is just slightly outside these guidelines. Hold down Shift and apply that transformation. Change the blend mode to soft light. And then using the same process that we just did, we're going to create another layer mask. So going to go to our layer mask icon, check that selected. Foreground colour is black. Got our rectangular marquee tool. And we only want to see these bottom dots here, so let's draw around those. Hit Shift Command I on the keyboard to select everything around it. Alt Delete. And then we're going to go and grab the last of our freebie textures. So go to File, Place Embedded, and we're going to go for this very nice grunge metal texture and place that. We're going to change the blend mode to overlay. So you can already see kind of where that is in relation to the design below it, and reduce the opacity to 80%. Then using the free transform tool, we're just going to bring that down so that the entire shape fills or matches, the base we have here. For the final part, we just want to fill a bit of this space here, so I'm going to go back and grab another freebie file that we used earlier. That's from Studio M18, and this kind of line track pattern that we've got here. Hold down Shift so that the top lines up with the base of our sort of temple area, and we're just going to stretch that quite a bit so that it fills quite a bit of that gap. That'll do the job. Click Return to apply the transformation. And then finally, we're going to add a Hue Saturation adjustment layer. Just try that again. So we're going to add a Hue Saturation adjustment layer. Make sure it's clipped to the layer below. Make sure Colorize is selected. And then change the hue to 38, saturation to 50, and the lightness to 33. And that gives us this kind of nice sandy brown colour. Then we're going to group all those layers we just created together and name it ground. Finally, we're going to grab all our groups and layers between the paper texture and the text layer. So from sky to screen texture, we're going to click that, hold down Shift, click on the top one, and that'll select everything in between. Command G to group. I'm going to name this layer mask. And as you might have guessed, we're going to create a clipping mask for this layer. So we're going to click our icon here. Make sure it's the thumbnail selected. Check that the foreground colour is set to black. Select the rectangular marquee tool. And using our guidelines, let's trace the rectangle there. And this is why we've kept an overlap throughout the design, just so that we kind of effectively got an image bleed. Release that. Press Shift Command I on the keyboard to select everything around it. Press Alt Delete, and you can see that's given us a nice clean edge. And if we press Command semicolon and hide the guides, you can see that we've got our completed design. You can now go ahead and save your completed design, but what we're going to do is go a little bit further by adding this to a Mockup template to kind of present it in a real life situation. So once you've saved your design, what we're going to do is go to the little hamburger drop down menu in the layers panel and flatten image. And that'll give us just one layer there, and we're going to click on the little padlock icon so that we can move that later. Go to File, Open, and we're going to go to this Mockup template, which has been created using some resources kindly donated by Mockup Zone. And And what we're going to do is go to the layer here that says replace, smart object, double click, and you can see that we've got our new canvas here. Go back to our design, click on the layer in the layers panel, and just click and drag that over to our smart object window. Click OK. And as you can see, that's not quite the size we want it. So we're going to click Command and T on the keyboard to select our free transform tool. Hold down Alt and Shift to scale everything. And as the proportions are a little bit different, what we might need to do is just focus on getting the main portion of the design in here. And once you're happy with that, click the tick icon, maybe just nudge it up a little more, and then hit Command and S on the keyboard to save. Go back to our template. You can see that our image has now appeared in the frame, looking like a nice little holiday memento. And that's the end of our colourful travel postcard tutorial. Thank you so much for following along. I hope you enjoyed it and found it useful. And just remember that we've only used a tiny portion of the high quality resources available in the Versatile Textures and Patterns collection. Featuring packs from Lisa Glanz, Counterpart Creative, Studio M18 and many more, this is a collection full of inspiring resources that you'll not be able to wait to use in your designs. And finally, we always love seeing what you've created, so if you followed along with this tutorial or created your own design from the freebies or bundle, please do share with us on our Facebook page, or if you have any comments or questions, leave them here and I'll be more than happy to help. Thanks again and see you next time.